Ever wonder what really goes on in the world of offshore oil rigs, wind farms, and the energy industry that powers your life? Find the answers to those questions and more on the podcast Wind, Waves, and Wells with Joe. Wind, Waves, and Wells with Joe pulls back the curtain and shares the raw, unfiltered stories from the front lines of energy. From offshore drilling disasters to wind turbine advancements, Joe brings on people who've lived it, worked it, and have the scars or the laughs to prove it. When you tune into Wind, Waves, and Wells with Joe, you'll hear jaw-dropping experiences like being 100 meters underwater with no air, to real conversations about safety, environmental impact, and the politics that don't make it into the brochures. It's insight, storytelling, and sometimes controversy, and always honest. If you're an energy insider or just someone curious about the wild world that keeps the lights on, Wind, Waves, and Wells with Joe is the podcast for you. Available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Real people, real stories, no filter. Wind, Waves, and Wells with Joe. Start listening right now.
Tom, thank you so much for coming on.
Great to be here. Thanks.
For those that might not know much about you, do you want to give us a short introduction to yourself?
I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, which I'm currently back visiting. I've been all over the world. My last passport for oil and gas, my last passport actually had pages added because I ran out of space for immigration shops. So I've dealt with oil companies, every single major oil company in the world. With, I think the only exception is I've never dealt with Russia, but I've mostly around 30 countries and bounced around. I've worked onshore, offshore. And now I'm back in the U.S. So I was over in Asia for 20 years. Interesting. And now I'm back in the U.S. in colder weather instead of being on the tropics.
What kind of roles were you doing when you were working in the industry?
Project management, mostly. I had actually 10 years in customized valves, mostly for offshore oil and gas platforms, specifically emergency shutdown valves and all the equipment that goes with it. For a while, I was involved in a very specialized proprietary product called Valve Watch, which was a emergency shutdown valve monitoring system, which you can check the integrity of the valve without closing the valve.
Fair enough. I'm not going to go too much into it though. But what I was going to say is where do you think you learned the most, lessons wise? Where did you get your biggest lessons?
Offshore, dealing with getting projects done with the equipment at hand and learning how to cope with shortages of equipment that you're supposed to have and you don't have, and you got to get it done anyway.
It's like every trip offshore then.
Yes. Well, see, onshore, you can just run to the hardware store or you can order it and have some supplier drop it off within a few hours or the next day. That doesn't really work that way on an offshore platform, especially if you're like a mile or two offshore in the middle of nowhere. If you're close to shore, you can just send a boat and get it or chop it out. But it's different. And people who have worked only onshore just don't get, one, how cramped and crowded it is and how everyone really has to work together. And you don't really have dead weight on an offshore oil platform. Every person there has a very specific task and a very specific role, and there's no fluff. In a lot of companies outside of oil and gas especially, you'll find all sorts of employees that don't exactly do a whole lot of anything. They're employees, but it's like if you take them out, nothing's going to happen. That's not true on an offshore oil platform. It's just not. Realize I have more experience onshore than I do offshore. But I've worked on, I think, 7 offshore platforms: Murphy Oil, Talisman, and Shell, and Petronas also. So each company has a different way of doing things. Safety is priority, and people who have never worked offshore don't understand the massive safety considerations on this cramped, highly pressurized, highly explosive situation where no, you can't just walk around with a sparking device or a lighter or matches or smoke anywhere you want, because things can go kaboom. So, and you can't just run away, because if something happens, you have to literally jump into the ocean, which is not exactly a safe thing, or to breaking your legs and all that stuff. So being inculcated with all of the safety concerns working on a offshore oil platform translates well to working in other businesses and other project management. Lately, I've been doing my last few jobs. I did a solar power project, installed it from beginning to end, and then also I was a consultant for setting up a project management office at an electric utility in Wisconsin. So their project managers were actually project engineers that got thrown into managing projects. I had no idea what they were doing, honestly, as far as project management. Great engineers, but managing projects is not the same thing as, engineering and design. So we were brought in to help them set up a standardized way of managing projects rather than a herd of cats and every new project manager just did everything their own way. And this is, unfortunately, this happens more and more. It has been happening a lot. And setting up a project management office is basically standardized. And being in oil and gas, you understand what standardizing is. This is what's missing in a lot of industries. So comparing solar power industry or wind industries to oil and gas has ASME, ANSI, you've got API, you've got all of these international standards, and anywhere you go in the world, you can take out, one of my specialties is valves, you can take out any valve from any installation and plug in another valve of any brand of the same size and spec, and it will magically fit. All the bolts align, all the pressure, all the materials, everything is all standardized. A lot of industries, it's proprietary. So solar power is not standardized. Wind power is not standardized. And a lot of IT, everything is proprietary. Oil and gas is one of the few industries in the world where pretty much every single thing, parts, materials, how it's constructed, how it's tested, is all exceedingly standardized to American standards. And anywhere you go in the world, everything for oil and gas is in English, with the exception of France. In France, everything must be in French. They're the exception. But everything
That doesn't surprise me.
British standards or American standards. So you got API, American Petroleum Institutes, or you got, to a lesser degree, British standards. But basically everything is in English, and working anywhere in the world in oil and gas, the people in charge must speak English, which my wife speaks 7 languages, and she gets frustrated that I can only speak 1. But I'm also mildly dyslexic. So learning languages is not one of my skill sets. I had 4 years of Latin in high school, and it was a waste of time. I just can't learn another language. So people who can speak more than one language have a leg up on me. So anyway, wandering off topic here.
No, that's all right. I'll bring you back in. You said you worked solar. Have you worked wind as well? Or is that the only kind of renewables you've done, or alternative energy? Sorry, I was saying.
I just can't bring myself to do wind. It's the only way wind works is with government subsidies. You take the subsidies away, and it doesn't matter. So I went blindly in. When I moved back to the U.S., the first job that I got was installing a solar power farm, and it's like, okay, all forms of energy, blah 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 blah. And I found out the hard way. It's like the entire company was set up on the premise of getting tax rebates from the government. So they were chasing it for the money. It wasn't about green or environment or anything else. That was the show that they put on, but it was exceedingly apparent it was all about the money and nothing about the environment. Honestly, it was really, really eye-opening. So since then, and that was like 5 years ago, I've done a little bit more looking into wind and solar, and it's like, I'm not a fan of them. So wind, I don't think really has a place unless you're out in the middle of nowhere and you can't hook up to the grid. Small solar arrays have a place in remote rural areas where they're not connected to the grid, especially in developing countries. And on rooftops, and where I was living in Malaysia, all new houses had to have a solar panel array to heat the hot water, which makes sense. It's a tropical country, so it's like. But large-scale solar arrays taking up farmland, no, I just don't agree with that anymore. So the more I've looked into it, I've repeatedly stated, this might upset some people, and I don't care. There is no such thing as green energy. There is no such thing as renewable energy. There is no such thing as clean energy. It's energy. Some are more clean than others, but even in the US, people, look down on coal, but the newer generation of coal plants are actually quite clean because they put these scrubbers out, which cost a lot of money, but it basically sucks up the pollution and doesn't let it get out into the atmosphere. So when you take a look at the materials that are being used to manufacture these solar power panels and the wind turbines, and how the foundations for these wind turbines are massive. And what's going to happen when all these wind turbines start reaching end of life 20 years from now, and you've got these massive concrete structures in the ground, and there's no money set aside to restore these back to brass. So in oil and gas, and also electric utility companies in the United States, when something reaches its end of life, oil companies and electric utility companies are required to have money set aside to do something called return to grass. In other words, you rip everything up, take all of the metal and infrastructure and everything out, and plant seed, and it becomes a field again, like nothing was ever there. In offshore oil platforms, you have the choice of either getting rid of it, which is very expensive, or leaving it in place, which is actually helpful for the environment because the fish love it. You've got the whole ecosystems that revolve around the abandoned structures for oil and gas. So you got all these creatures that I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head, barnacles, and
Yeah.
they attack. Working on offshore platforms, I've seen whale sharks, I've seen tuna fish, I've seen all sorts of animals, and they like being around there because it attracts little tiny fish, and then the big fish like to eat the smaller fish. And there's a whole ecosystem that thrives when they're done. But onshore, oil companies are supposed to have money set aside to close and cap the wells and, remove all the equipment from there. I don't see the same thing for wind or solar. So there's a double standard there. And again, they are using government subsidies, aka taxpayer money, to do this. So calling it green, calling it environmentally friendly, they are none of those. And it's the biggest profit of this is China. China is the largest. He's basically got the corner of the market for manufacturing wind and solar equipment. They're the one pushing the green agenda to the detriment of Western countries who are silly enough to buy into this. So I'm very proudly oil and gas, have been. I'm not ashamed of it. It's reliable energy, done properly. It's clean, done properly. It's basically environmentally friendly. CO2 is our friend. It's plant food, and the more CO2 we have, more plants grow. And I just lack the whole climate change stuff, which is one of my pet things that I write about. So I grew up on a farm. I like the environment. When we were kids, we planted 17,000 pine trees over a course of years back in the swamp. It's no longer a swamp. So I like being environmentally friendly, and I do not view oil and gas as not environmentally friendly. And if you're in the industry for a long time, you know how much care and effort goes into causing least harm, is applicable to the environment when you're doing oil and gas. But I do not see the same precautions being taken with quote unquote green energy sources of wind and solar. So lately I've been on a kick also of nuclear, which I have some skepticism about of what to do, but it seems like a viable way forward if they can figure out what to do with the waste when it's done.
Back to you. I'm going to play devil. No, it's fine. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a few things because for offshore wind, for example, you could say the same with regards to leaving the monopiles in the ground. Would be similar to in that perspective to leaving platform jackets in the ground, though, would it not?
I don't disagree with that. The problem is the only way offshore wind is viable economically is with massive government subsidies. You take away the subsidies, they don't work. Oil and gas doesn't need subsidies for offshore oil and gas to work because the world needs oil and gas. So the energy transition, what they call it, there's no such thing as the energy transition. The demand for energy globally just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. So the demand for oil and gas has consistently, over the last century, grown year on year. The only hiccup there was during the COVID lockdown period where there was a slight dip. But that was an anomaly because people they're not
Didn't do
traveling to
anything.
work.
Yeah.
It didn't do anything. So it's like, but apart from that, you look at the overall trend, all forms of energy are growing. Oil, gas, coal, nuclear, wood. We're burning more wood now than we did 100 years ago globally. It's insane.
Yeah.
So the demand for all energy is increasing, and I know wind and solar are, all happy that they're increasing the, percentage of how much electricity is being generated, but they're not comparing it with the amount of energy still growing by coal, specifically in China and the developing worlds, and oil and gas. So all forms of energy consistently, their demand is growing globally. There is no energy transition. There's only energy addition. You're adding
But what do you say?
more and more.
What do you say? What do you say to the people that, and I'm sure you'll get plenty of arguments to your views, but
Oh, I do. Yeah.
the people that say we can't rely on oil and gas forever, what do you say to that?
I view oil as a renewable resource. I view natural gas as a renewable resource. I do not view most oil as from, dead dinosaurs and dead plankton and all this other stuff. I'm not a believer in that. It took me a long time to come to that conclusion. I don't view the world is going to run out of oil and gas much in the same way that I do. I just don't see it that way. So methane, eat a bunch of beans, you're going to get some methane. Methane is found on, one of the moons of, I think it's Titan or whatever, one of the outer space. So methane is a natural gas. It is, some of it can come from, you can get biomethane, which is from, animal waste and plant waste and all that good stuff. But there's also other forms of natural gas. I am not a believer in oil being a finite resource. That was a myth started by Rockefeller way back over 100 years ago. And he is the one that coined the term fossil fuel to make it seem like it was a limited resource and to drive the price of oil up. And it was quite successful. And it's since stuck around ever since then. I realize I'm a minority in my beliefs on this. I don't care.
Yeah, no, I can imagine you are. Yeah, I'm not disputing it or anything like that. I have myself read into, I think I read a few years back about there was a Russian scientist or something like that basically compressed. He put something in I think it was like shells or something like that, and he tried to basically compare how the soil would form over 25 million years by putting pressure on the top and blah blah blah, and they found there was no hydrocarbons produced at the back of it. So, like I say, I like to take everyone's point of view in regards to it, but I think I'll come back to obviously the renewable side of things. How long do you see this kind of phase lasting though? Because I've gone into it in the last couple of years. I work offshore. I'm in it at the moment. I do see benefits of it. I'm not going to lie. I think we're all entitled to our own thoughts and that. I think in more remote areas, especially in Europe, some of the wind farms that are getting installed there are tied back to more remote kind of towns and stuff like that. I think the benefits are there. Yeah, it does have a place, and that's kind of my belief. I don't believe you can run the major cities off the back of it. I honestly don't. I think there's too much demand that comes from them, and obviously with the emergence now of AI, I think that's just going to put a whole load more load on everything in that perspective. But I do see it has a place, but I don't think you can build an economy around the back of it. Personally, I think in the long run that's kind of my views on it. But I do think it has a place.
What I get, I just laugh when people say wind and solar will replace oil and gas. And it's like, no, that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. Besides the intermittency of both wind and solar, because there's periods of time when neither produce, and there's periods of time when they produce too much, when the sun is too hot or when the wind is blowing too strong. And then, at night, clearly solar is not going to work. And when there's no wind, then wind doesn't work. And they can only produce electricity, but oil and gas are actual fuel sources. Electricity is a secondary form of energy, with the exception of lightning. So if someone can find out a way to harvest lightning and store it, that would be a great thing. which I don't see happening anytime soon because there's no government subsidies for it. But this fad will last for a while, wind and solar, so long as they're massive government subsidies. Once the subsidies dry up, you will see these projects being canceled and the companies doing this going bankrupt. So there's been numerous offshore wind projects that have been canceled over the last year or so. I lose track of it. I don't have it off the top of my head, the top of my tongue right now, but Ørsted was one of them, because even with massive government subsidies, like 50%, it still was not economically viable. So that tells you right there, these companies are in it for the money. And once the government subsidies dry up, then these large projects are going to dry up. And that's going to be driven further by the rise of artificial intelligence data centers. And the only viable way that I can see right now to power AI data centers, because the current administration in the U.S. is basically saying, hey, you want to have a data center, you need to come up with your own source of energy rather than leeching it off the existing grid, because the existing grid is already overwhelmed. So you got a few choices. Wind and solar with batteries is not one of them, because if it is, you have to have a backup system, 100% redundant backup system of natural gas or coal or nuclear. So the smartest way forward is natural gas or coal or nuclear for powering these massive new AI data centers. And people think, oh, we're going to get green electricity. We'll just install a massive solar power array with batteries, and the batteries, back up for an hour. Well, no, that's not a workable solution. It's not. Data centers need massive amounts of steady power every single second of every single day of every single year. And rotating power from spinning large turbines from burning natural gas or coal or from nuclear power plants is a steady state controllable source of firm energy. Wind and solar are not. Batteries can kick in, but these batteries are going to start wearing out, and I simply don't see it as a viable option. So natural gas is probably the fastest way going forward. The current Trump administration here is trying to cut the permitting process and environmental overregulation in the U.S. for starting up new gas power plants for these data centers. AI data centers and the explosion of what's being planned is probably going to speed up the slowdown of new solar and wind installations, because these installations are going to need reliable energy, and wind and solar are not reliable energy. Excuse me, my opinion.
Have they been totally taken off? I take it, is that kind of confirmed then that they won't be using either wind or solar? No.
People are going to try it. So, excuse me, I gotta get some water.
No worries.
People are looking at small modular reactors, which has definitely piqued my interest. And if these things actually work, I'm all for it. I like a diversity of energy. I like the concept of nuclear. My only question is what's going to happen with the nuclear waste. So there's different types of nuclear power reactors. There's molten salt. There's different ways of doing it. And the idea of small modular nuclear reactors, I think, is ideal for data, these new AI data centers. If it's workable, then that probably the most workable would be natural gas or coal, but there would be an outcry because people still think of coal in the U.S. as dirty, whereas actually the newer generation of coal power plants are not dirty in the U.S. There's restrictions in place. The old ones, yes, they're horrible and polluting. All these coal power plants that China is building at a rapid pace, 2 of them a week for the last couple of years, they are dirty. They are not clean. But in the U.S., the regulations, and I believe Canada as well, the regulations are so strict on coal, there's no reason to be shutting these things down prematurely. We can simply add, well, it's expensive. We can add scrubbers and it cleans up the emissions from them, and you can safely dispose of the pollution that is normally generated by coal. I would prefer natural gas because the U.S. has an abundance of natural gas, and I find it silly. I know the political reasons, but I find it silly that the U.S. is shipping out so much natural gas overseas. We should be holding that for ourselves. But the Trump administration wants to use it to sell LNG to EU because of the whole Russia thing, and it's like that's just politics. I'm looking at from a U.S. centric point of view. It's like, why are we selling off all of our, so much natural gas when we can just keep it in the ground for later, for our own domestic use, when the rest of the world is having trouble with it? So what's happening now with Russia, and I laugh about the new Power Siberia Tube pipeline from Russia to China. So there's the Power Siberia 1 natural gas pipeline, which has been in operation for a while. And they're finally working now on Power Siberia 2 natural gas pipeline. I guess they'd worked out the commercial considerations, and China won. So I guess they got a lower price than what Russia wanted to do. But realize, as Doomberg has put out, these are not my words, the Permian in the United States pumps out 4 times more natural gas than what the Power of Siberia pipeline is going to be pumping to China. People get all hung up on these pipelines that that Russia has, and compare it to how much natural gas just the Permian in the U.S. is pumping out. The U.S. has so much natural gas, it's insane. I think the only country in the world with more natural gas is Qatar. I haven't been paying attention to this for a few years, but Qatar is also a country that I personally would not want to be dealing with just because of all the politics that goes on there, just to the same way that I would not want to be dealing with Iran just because of all the politics around of it. When I was in Asia, in Malaysia, I've worked with Iranian engineers. I have no problem with Iranians. I've had Iranian staff under me in Malaysia, which is perfectly legal in the United States, or in Malaysia. Malaysia is one of the few countries in the world where Iranians can come without a visa, and students don't need a student visa. They can come for 6 months without a visa to Malaysia. So I've dealt with Iranian engineers. They know their stuff. The government is the problem, which is, well, I don't like governments in general. Let me put it that way. So, but dealing with oil and gas, you sort of have to close one eye of the governments that you deal with, because you're dealing with energy and try and keep politics out of it. And you got to do what you got to do. I'm really getting off the topic here, but
no, it's easy done. It's easy done. We'll pull it back to the subject. Obviously,
okay.
You said before we went on, you're more than aware of what's going on in Europe with regards to wind farms, etc. Yep. The subsidies, blah blah blah. How much is Trump? Obviously, we all know he's basically shit canned with offshore wind in the US, apart from the ongoing projects and whatnot. Is that it then for the offshore side of things for wind, do you think?
For the US, and I believe EU will still try and push this because of the whole green ideology. But now what's happening is even BlackRock, which is not a nice company, but they're the largest. I'm being polite. The largest company basically in the world for investments. They have backed off on the whole green transition ideology and have come to embrace and accept that they have come to the conclusion from a financial point of view, the point that I made earlier, there is no energy transition. There is only energy addition. So trying to cut out oil and gas is shooting themselves in the foot financially. So they will continue to support, but to a lesser degree, wind and solar, and they will now more strongly support begrudgingly. They don't like it, but they are begrudgingly accepting. They have no choice to accept investments in oil and gas because the world will continue to need oil and gas and nuclear for the foreseeable future. And pushing wind and solar to try and bully out oil and gas and nuclear is simply not working. They have come to that conclusion financially. So now with Trump basically calling, green energy a scam, which I agree with, by the way, EU can't really ignore this anymore. And as the large investment companies pull back the regulations they had, we're not going to deal with any oil and gas companies or any company that doesn't deal with green energy. That's all going away because they're losing money pushing that perspective. So again, energy addition, not energy transition. So the world needs more energy of all sorts. And yes, wind and solar do have its place, but that's never going to overtake oil and gas, not in the foreseeable future. And I'm talking for the next 50, 100 years. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I know, especially in the US, because I think basically your infrastructure is built around this stuff, is it, ultimately?
The pipeline infrastructure for oil and gas is the most massive in the world. Pull up sometime on Google or whatever. I don't use Google myself, but whatever internet search engine you use, and pull up a map of oil pipelines and then also a separate map of natural gas pipelines in the US. It is insane. There is no other country in the world that has even close to the amount of oil and gas pipeline infrastructure as the United States. It is so massive. And this is one reason why most other countries in the world can't do fracking economically, because to do fracking, you need a massive pipeline infrastructure for both oil and gas. And it's expensive to build out beforehand the pipeline infrastructure in order to do fracking. So this is one of the things that China has run into, and even they promote that, they do a bit of fracking. It's just a tiny bit. So that's why the US is basically the only country in the world that has successfully been able to do fracking for oil and gas. Look at just Texas itself. Holy crap. Pull up a map sometime and just look at it, and it'll blow your mind. And how this spider webs throughout the entire US, primarily from the Texas area to the New England, that northeast area. The pipeline infrastructure is just insane. Canada has been trying to get more pipeline infrastructure into the US to sell the heavy oil to the US. So, I mean, the American refineries need the heavy oil from either Canada or Venezuela, basically, to use their refineries to combine it with the ultralight oil from all the fracking that is going on in the US. So the fracking oil in the US is ultralight. And to balance it, you need to mix it with ultra heavy crude oil. That's how the refineries are up. So oil refineries don't run on any type of oil. They're built to refine specific grades and types of oil. And you can't just switch it from one grade or type of oil, from light to heavy or sweet to sour, without massively changing the whole structure of how this is done. It's very, very expensive. So it would be good for the US and Canada if Canada would be allowed to build a heavy fuel oil pipeline into the US, but the Biden administration blocked it, which was stupid. Day one, Joe Biden blocked the pipeline.
Yeah, Keystone. Yeah.
It was horrible. So, and now it's too late to redo it. So that means now the U.S. has to get the heavy crude from Venezuela, because that's how the oil refineries are done. So now the U.S. has a love-hate relationship with Venezuela. They want their crude oil, but they hate the government. So here's where we get into the politics again. And this is where I had so much fun being a moderator on international. I was a volunteer moderator on Oil Pro for a while.
How was that?
Like 10 years ago. It was wonderful. I enjoyed it. It was called the LinkedIn of the oil and gas world. Had over 1 million registered members. It was called the LinkedIn of the oil and gas world. You had to use your real picture. You had to use a real account. You had to list all your work experience. Otherwise, no one would talk to you. So there's no spam accounts.
Yeah.
Basically, people wanted to know, who are you and do you know what you're actually talking about? So there would be a lot of very, very technical discussions about onshore, offshore refineries, natural gas, oil, everything under the sun. And it was just booming like crazy. And it got taken down by a competing website and the judge ordered the site not only shut down, but the server removed from the internet, never to be brought up again. So everything was wiped out. So the problem was not the all the people on there. The problem was the person who founded the website also founded RigZone and then sold RigZone and started OilPro, and then he stole the user database from RigZone to start up OilPro, and he got thrown in prison for 2 years. But that left all of us in the lurch. So RigZone, I understand they're upset, but it's like they shouldn't have disconnected. I wish we could have archived this because it was like an encyclopedia for the oil and gas world. There's just a mountain of knowledge on there. So me as a moderator, I encourage very lively discussions. But it's like, before we started talking here, my tagline on OilPro as a moderator was exceedingly specific. And this is 10 years ago. Back in the days of signatures, when people had signatures on their forms. So mine was very specific. It was just my opinion, semicolon. As always, comma, you are free to disagree. It's very wide open. I don't expect people to agree with my opinions, which are highly opinionated and generally a minority viewpoint. But let's have a discussion. Don't be a dick. Don't, start cursing people out. No threats of violence, none of that stuff. I would just ban people for, it's like, you want to get into a fight and you're going to threaten to hit somebody? No, I'm sorry. Time up for you. So that's where I learned to, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I've got like 27,000 followers and came close to breaking 10 million views this year. I lose track of it. Anyway, I'm very, very mouthy there, but I don't cross the line. So I'm sorry. What was the question again? I don't.
No, we can. Do you think it wasn't actually a question I was listening to? And well, what I was. Do you think the industry has lost too many plain speakers?
Yes.
Speaking. Yeah.
So I've been on a few podcasts. So David Blackmon, he's been a voice of reason for a long time. Stuart Turley, Armando Cavana, Arena Slav. I've chatted with all these people on podcasts, and they're one of the very few groups of people that are plain talkers. Doomberg is another one, but I don't subscribe to his paid Substack, but I like what he, that group, that person writes about. It's level-headed. But most of it, the news that you see in the mainstream media is just garbage. It's just like, it has a heavily anti-oil and gas and coal viewpoints, and everything is, climate panic. I poke fun of, it's like the world is not ending, and it's like, you guys want to panic that the world is ending? I'm just going to laugh at you. Go ahead, knock yourself out. So I make a lot of memes about, poking fun at the climate panic stuff. So it used to be global cooling and then global warming, and then it changed around to climate change, and then climate Armageddon and climate hell and global boiling. It's like, guys, make up your mind. The world is not ending. And they keep saying the world is ending because people are burning what they call fossil fuels. And again, fossil fuels is a propaganda term coined by Rockefeller to make it seem as if oil and gas are going to run out in order to raise prices. It's not fossil fuels. It's hydrocarbons. That is the correct term. And I usually don't go down to the rabbit hole on that. But just after this, look up hydrocarbons and Rockefeller and how he turned the whole thing of oil and gas into something that seems to be a shortage. The world is not running out of oil and gas.
Yeah, I think that's actually some of the things I've started to look into, actually, is regards to consumption and production of oil and gas at the moment. And the trend doesn't seem to be, I think I saw something about it, peak and stuff like that, but the peak's been going on for quite a while.
Just back in the 70s, it was going to peak.
Yeah.
Years ago.
But yeah, we continue to keep producing year on year. Our production levels seem to, obviously bar COVID, which was, but we do seem to keep producing more and more each year.
UK, refuses to do more drilling in the North Sea, even though new studies have shown there's 4 times amount of oil and gas still in the existing reserves as was previously thought. So they would rather import and pay a premium for importing oil and gas rather than utilizing the North Sea. And it's like, that's
that's another rabbit hole. Yeah, but I'll tell you what, the US are doing all right because the imports of the LNG are absolutely unbelievable. That alongside Norway, who are absolutely milking is, yeah. But again, that's a rabbit hole that you could go on for ages.
Well, now Russia is like, this is going to actually end up hurting European Union for a long time. So Germany in particular is massively struggling economically because they've chased away and shut down their reliable sources of energy. And now they have to import much more expensive energy. So regardless of the politics of using Russia for natural gas, that was still cheaper than purchasing liquefied natural gas from the US. And now what's happening is Russia is going to be shipping their natural gas pipeline supply over to Asia, specifically to China. And later on down the road, I think 2 decades down the road, Russia's not going to deal with European Union for energy anymore. So European Union is now going to have to start importing mostly from overseas. Qatar they can do, but Australia, US, they're not going to be able to use the energy resources, either natural gas or oil or LNG from Russia. And even though they still are to some extent, there's all these sanctions, European Union is still buying it. It's like, that's insane. You guys are just stupid. So you did sanctions against Russian oil and gas, but you're still buying Russian oil and gas. It's like, politicians drive me crazy. But the thing is, what they're doing now with all these sanctions is diverting Russia's massive amounts of natural resources. And it's not just oil and gas. It's also coal, minerals, all sorts of things that is now being shunted away from the European Union and over to Asia, mostly currently to China. And China is sucking up all of these long-term reliable energy contracts for oil, natural gas, and coal, and selling to the world renewable energy, quote unquote, renewable energy. Hey, buy our solar panels. And they're just laughing because what's happening is the West buying into this whole, the world is ending because we're burning, oil and gas and coal, and let's use solar power panels instead. Our grids are overloaded, and we've been warning about this for years. I remember I've been ranting about this for probably at least 5 years. The Western electrical grids are totally overloaded, and the more you reduce reliable energy sources from oil and gas and coal and nuclear and ramp up wind and solar, which are intermittent and not steady state, they're highly fluctuating, and they come and go, and they're intermittent and all this other stuff. And they say, oh, back it up with batteries. It's not the same thing. Look what happened with Spain a couple months ago. So the government doesn't want to admit it, but I can speak plain as day. What happened is 2 things. You reduced the reliable energy from heavy spinning objects, which has mass and inertia, with intermittent electricity and battery backup from wind and solar. And as you reduce reliable inertia energy from spinning turbines, from burning coal, natural gas, nuclear, and increase intermittent, unpredictable electricity sources, which spike and drop massively all the time, the grids were never meant to handle that. So grids around the world, electric grids, doesn't matter where you go, they're 40, 50 years old, at least the existing infrastructure. They were never meant to handle, 1, the load, and 2, the changes to the load from steady state to fluctuating. The massive fluctuations when you add in, when solar starts producing way too much electricity because you get an extra bright sunny day, and then at night it all goes away. The grid was never meant to handle that. It was designed to handle basically a steady state load, which can be ramped up or slowed down to some extent from natural gas or coal. That's what it was designed for. So the electric grids are, this is why I'm running back to AI, that the rise of AI and the new AI data power centers are going to put such a load on the grid. Electric utility companies are going to have no choice to expand more on natural gas. They won't want to do coal and probably nuclear, but natural gas seems likely the way forward. And luckily, the U.S. has so much natural gas; it's not a problem for the U.S., but it's going to be a big problem for the European Union and other Western countries. So, planning to add more wind and solar to the grid is only going to make the problem for the electric grid worse. And the massive expansion plans for artificial intelligence is going to cause havoc with the plans of adding more wind and solar. That's my viewpoint, and I don't see any way around this.
What's the current state of the oil and gas industry in America at the moment?
Bizarre. Trump can't have it both ways. He wants low oil prices and also wants drill, baby, drill. And what I've repeatedly stated is the best thing that the current administration could do, or any United States administration can do for the domestic oil and gas industry in the U.S. is cut excess regulations. Cut the red tape. The permitting process takes years. The environmental review process takes years. EPA, get rid of it. It has outlived its usefulness and has only become a bureaucracy. So an example of excess bureaucracy is the European Union bureaucracy. Everything is overly regulated to the point of it is regulation for the sake of regulation itself. It has no viewpoint of making things more efficient or better or anything. It's just a bloated Borg mass that just keeps growing and growing and growing and getting worse and worse and worse. Digital ID. So, and things like that. Where
God,
yeah, different rabbit hole. But the best thing that can happen for the domestic oil and gas industry in the U.S. specifically is cut these excess regulations. Excess. So OSHA is another one that is Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Just excess bureaucracy. So cut it back. Make oil and gas more self-regulating, and people will have horrified about that. Well, it's like the thing is, oil and gas is already one of the most self-regulating industries in the Western world. I'm not going to get into non-Western world. I've been to China. I've been to Vietnam, where the rules are that you're just broken. There's like next to no safety standards. It's just insane. So in China, somebody dies, they just pull them out and throw another body in. Next, it's like the value of life is just
horrible, isn't it? Yeah.
People think I'm joking about this, but I am not. Somebody dies, they really don't care. It's like it's just cheaper to get a new person than to get better machinery. It's just insane. The opposite is true in most Western worlds. In the developing world, the amount of safety standards that go in is just mind-boggling in oil and gas compared to most other industries that I've seen. So I'm not talking about getting rid of safety standards. I'm talking about the whole permitting process, the amount of money it takes, the amount of time it takes. You've got a whole bank of lawyers and researchers that are doing nothing but coming up with these complying with government permits. And it's like, it has gotten to the point, the whole point of permitting under the previous Biden administration was to shut it down. They wanted very plainly to keep oil and gas in the ground, and we're going to make your life so difficult. But on the other hand, then you've got but we also want low gasoline prices. And it's like, yeah, well, you want to shut down the domestic oil and gas industry in the United States, but you also want low oil and low gasoline prices and low electricity. It's like these do not make sense. So the current Trump administration doesn't. I love Chris Wright as energy secretary in the United States. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He knows his background. Jennifer Granholm was a moron. She should have never been an energy secretary. She was what I call energy illiterate. And I throw that around. Energy illiteracy. Jennifer Granholm, exhibit number 1. She is clueless. She had no idea what she was talking about. So getting rid of bureaucracy that is there for the sake of bureaucracy, and getting rid of bureaucracy which is meant to make business as difficult and time-consuming and expensive as possible. Get rid of that crap. And I would say the same thing to the EU. Digital ID is one of my pet peeves right now.
We're not going down that way. We're avoiding that way now.
Okay, so but the thing is, it's bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy and more government control. So I'm a big believer in limited government. So let's limit the government. Let's limit these permits. Let's have a standardized, simplified permitting procedure, standardized, simplified environmental procedure. And the thing is, there's been a 2-tier standard for environmental permitting for oil and gas compared to wind and solar. So the same level of excruciating detail for coming up with the new environmental permit for oil and gas was not applied for new solar power sites, for new wind sites, both onshore and offshore. They were not. So where is the standardization? Why do wind and solar largely get a pass on a lot of the permitting required, environmental permitting required for oil and gas? Why do they get away with it? Because it's the favored industry. And that's, this is the government playing favorites. So what Trump is doing now is he's taking away that favoritism, and the people that have been getting all these subsidies for ages, wind and solar, are screaming bloody murder. So let's level the playing field. Have wind and solar must comply with the same environmental regulations as oil and gas in the United States, because that has not been happening. And I will firmly dispute that with anyone who says it has. It has not. So, people are saying, oh, oil and gas is more subsidized than wind and solar. It's like, no, that's nonsense. Not in the US anyway. So let's level the playing field. Let's have the same rules and regulations and permitting processes for all forms of energy, and also reduce the bureaucracy to make it easier, because the world is rapidly going to need much more energy. And if it stays on course, all these AI data centers will not be built. Actually, I'm not a fan of AI either. So that's a totally separate coin. I poke fun at it. It's not intelligence. It's a glorified Excel spreadsheet. That's basically my view of it. So garbage in, garbage out. So like an Excel spreadsheet, if you plug in a whole bunch of garbage, the results are not going to work. So AI is learning 40% of, it's insane. 40% of the online learning from AI is from social media. And the biggest one is Reddit, which is
yeah,
seriously, really, guys?
Discussion boards.
So I actually had a program on LinkedIn that wanted to copy me and write posts for me, and basically read all of my stuff. And I'm prolific. I can't even, I've written, just in oil and gas, I've written 30,000 comments and articles about oil and gas in the last decade. I am prolific, and that's just oil and gas. And lately I don't write about it so much because I have so much fun just writing about everything else under the sun. So AI program that basically tried to copy my sarcastic, absurd, surreal style on LinkedIn, and that it did an okay job of it. But again, it was woke, and it's like, yeah, that's not the way I write. And it's like, you guys just don't get it. So the AI these days is pointing people in the wrong direction. So it won't break my heart to see AI break down and fail, of massive new buildup of AI, because AI is more and more going the wrong directions, becoming heavily, heavily, heavily biased, and it can't think critically. So I hope there's a slowdown in AI data centers, which will give a little bit of reprieve for the electric grids in the United States and the EU. But most of the AI data centers are used by governments basically to monitor what its citizens are doing. And the sparkly, shiny thing that people use it for is making funny pictures and writing comments for them automatically. But what it's mostly used for at Langley, Virginia, is probably the largest user of AI in the Western world. It's used to monitor people. It sucks up everything that you're doing and basically tracks you digitally. And this is what AI is actually used for. So TikTok was taken out of control of China and is now controlled by Larry Ellison primarily. This is a bad thing. I would rather be in charge of China controlling TikTok than Larry Ellison, honestly. That's another rabbit hole I don't want to go down, but
yeah.
The rise of
Firstly,
AI,
I can't see AI slowing down anyway. No way. What it offers,
energy.
especially the new generation and stuff, I cannot see it slowing. I think it's going to ramp up at a ridiculous rate because it makes things so much easier for people who would basically it's like the perfect. Yeah, it's the perfect antidote to this kind of generation that are coming through. They must think, well, mate, do everything on it.
What will slow it down is the lack of energy.
Yeah,
Reliable energy. This is the big roadblock. And as I'm saying, when push comes to shove and reality intercedes firmly and takes the green energy unicorn dream and grinds it into the ground, AI data centers need reliable, large amounts of energy. And wind and solar are not going to cut it. And if you get a large AI data center built solely with wind and solar with battery backup, it's going to start failing and people are going to get pissed off. Hey, my social media feed isn't working because there's a glitch for 2 seconds in the AI database and all the servers shut down. Yeah. So the rise of more and more AI data centers is probably going to mean the realistic rise of more natural gas power plants, more coal power plants, more small modular nuclear reactors if these companies can get this stuff off the ground, and less large-scale industrial wind and solar farms, which need massive amounts of subsidies anyway in order to make them economically viable, honestly. And from the business point of view, much like BlackRock came to the conclusion oil and gas and coal and nuclear are necessary for running the world, and there's simply no way around this, and wind and solar cannot replace them. AI data centers will come to the same conclusion. Therefore, more natural gas and coal and nuclear will be needed, and less wind and solar will be needed to power the massive rise of AI. And yes, the younger generation wants more and more AI. I use it to make silly pictures. I refuse to. People want AI to check their work. I don't. It is interesting watching these AI programs spit out these draft posts for me to post on LinkedIn, and I posted them just out of amusement. And it's like, yeah, no, AI. I'm sorry. The way I write, AI simply can't copy it. They can try it, but even people were commenting. It's like, Tom, this is not you. So AI cannot come up with original ideas, just like an Excel spreadsheet can't come up with original ideas. It's great at sucking up massive amounts of data and correlating it, cross-referencing, and all this other stuff, but it cannot actually come up with anything new. Humans can, and this is the differentiation between computers and the human brain. Humans can be infinitely renewable with ideas, come up with renewable is not the wrong word, coming up with new ideas.
Regenerative.
What's happening is AI is being increasingly trained on existing AI. So it's like making a carbon copy of a carbon copy. And it's like, it's just going to keep degrading. So as more and more AI data centers get built out, and as they copy more and more idiotic posts from Reddit and using that as their database, it's like, okay, so you're going to get down this dumbed down moronic viewpoints of what's going on rather than actual thinking from intelligent people. AI doesn't have a bright future as far as replacing human thinking, in my view. I'm going to step for a minute and back over to you.
What's the proudest moment of your career so far that stand out?
Couple things. I installed valve watch on an offshore oil platform by myself. This is a proprietary system. It was the first installations out in the North Sea. It was for monitoring emergency shutdown valve without closing the valve. In other words, you'd be able to predict whether or not the valve would leak when you close the valve, but you'd be able to do that from the valve in the open position. It's a little bit technical, but it works. So I started off the first time we did it. I think I did some track 5 or 7 installations. First time we had to bring in people from the U.S. and from the North Sea to be able to do it. And by the last time, I didn't have to have them out there. I did it myself. So this was hardware, software, proprietary software. It was not Microsoft. Cabling, networking, again, proprietary computer systems, proprietary sensors, and I learned how to do the whole thing. And I'm not an engineer. My degree is in sociology and I have a minor in behavioral psychology. I grew up on a farm. My parents wanted me to be in religion, and I got kicked out of religious school for asking too many questions about doctrine, which anyone who knows me doesn't surprise them. So anyway, I went on, and in the last 2 years, I went to Western Michigan University, and I got a degree in sociology. If I could go back again, I would be probably an engineer, which is much more practical. But learning how to do all that stuff with my background of growing up on a dairy farm, cash crop farm, picking up rocks, pulling weeds in the field, milking the cows, all this other stuff. I'm not scared of real work. I don't do it anymore these days. You can see I've got gray hair. So that was interesting, learning the whole brand new system that nobody else knew. There's just a handful of people in the world that knew how to do that. The other one was the most daunting I had to do is we had a contract with Oman, the government of Oman, actually the National Oil Company of Oman.
PDO.
Yes. And we were supposed to replace a critical piece of machinery equipment. It was actually the key valve for their entire pipeline system. It was like the emergency shutdown valve for their entire pipeline system. And Oman is a oil exporting country. It was made of highly exotic materials, super high pressure. The thing weighed 17 tons. It was huge. It was massive. And it was in canal with exotic trims and all this other stuff, exotic materials. And we were behind schedule, and we knew we weren't going to make the deadline. And they started kicking up a fuss, and we said, well, look, there's just shortages of materials and manpower and all this other stuff. And they got in a meeting with the owner of the company, my boss, who I reported directly to, and he said, get on a plane and go talk to these guys. So I flew out to Oman. Nice place, very, very hot. Holy crap. Scorching. It's the first time I'd ever done it.
I lived there for 13 years.
Oh, okay. So you don't have to talk about.
Yeah.
Very nice country. The people are just so friendly. It's just amazing. So I got there, and I walked into the room, and there's like 25 people there, and there's government ministers and senior engineers and senior government officials. And I'm like, it's just me, and I'm there to explain why we're going to be late. And so they went around the room and everyone introduced, and they basically laid it out. Like, okay, look, here's the situation. And we're not going to talk about liquidated damages. That's not the point. And if you're in oil and gas, you're very familiar with liquidated damages, I'm sure, and what they are. So they said, okay, what's going to happen is we need to change this out by the end of next month, or we are going to be fined $1 million a day by the government.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah. Now, liquidated damages in oil and gas, typically it's going to be 5% of the total purchase order value. So if you got, anyway, you work it out, and it's done on a weekly basis up to certain weeks. So this was a little bit different, $1 million a day, which actually, when you think about it, my viewpoint of a shutdown on an offshore oil and gas platform, my rule of thumb is generally, on average, it's going to be $1 million a day in lost production of oil and gas. And every day it's shut down. And you've got to do controlled shutdowns for oil and gas, at least on an annual basis, to do maintenance and change things out and all this other stuff. So it's a significant loss in revenue, but it's planned for. So this was an unplanned thing. So they just made it very clear. the government's going to charge us $1 million a day for every day that we are late installing this. So can you please see what you can do to rectify the situation? So flew back, spoke to my boss. We rearranged things. We got on extra people. We ended up air freighting this 17-ton valve.
I bet that was cheap.
Surprisingly, and this is where business comes in, we didn't lose money on it because we had such a huge markup on it. There was only a handful of companies in the world that could come up with
yeah.
the big type of, if you know from, this was not an off the rack. This was in canal, duplex stainless steel, exotic trim materials, very, very high. This thing was massive. So we got a Russian freight.
Antonov.
Anyway, and got it out there. And I guess from whatever connections my boss had, the owner of the company, they worked out something, and we didn't actually lose money. But the upside was the company didn't get blacklisted, because what would have happened, and I'm sure my boss understood this, is if we missed this delivery to Oman, we would basically be blacklisted as a company in the Middle East, which you don't want to do. So this was one of the most stressful meetings I had ever had, and it turned out okay. But it was just looking back on it, it's like, wow, okay. So I never want to do that again, honestly. But those were probably the two most memorable things that I've done.
Oh, that's a good way to wrap it up. And I will say, Tom, thanks so much for coming on, because it's always good to get views from the other side of the pond, especially here. You know, the Americans kind of, obviously, you know, speaking for all Americans, but a certain kind of American view of the energy sector. At the end of the day, I've always said I think it's a far bigger beast than what we know in Europe in terms of oil and gas and whatnot. But it's always good to get that insights from that side of the world as well. And I can't thank you enough for coming on.
It was fun talking to you. So have a great one.
Thank you.